travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a bit of exceptionally special palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's right, my favorite author, as you can probably tell by that tower of tomes that dwells behind me. You can just call me Fuego for short, and I very cordially welcome you here to the horror show. And this film, it's not a horror film. However, it has horrific elements in it that I feel like designate enough this discussion on this program that I have been doing for over 180 episodes at this particular point, nearly 3 years, and that film is none other than what is considered by many to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, American film of all time. SHAWSHANK Redemption. That's right. Morgan Freeman, Tim Robbins, a host of other amazing supporting players in this film, based on Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which was Cy King's collection of 4 novellas entitled Different Seasons that housed this story, along with 3 others, which were Apt Pupil, and then The Body, which became Stand By Me, and The Breathing Method, which is turning into a film next year in 2020, courtesy of Doctor Strange director Scott Derrickson. But really the one that everybody obviously talks about, besides The Body, which, you know, of the 2 movies that really changed people's impressions about Stephen King, and also the 2 films which a lot of people, as far as casual moviegoers who aren't into the spooktacular shizzle, a lot of them don't know that Stand By Me and Shawshank are actually Stephen King stories. It's just, you know, they seem so unlike his horror output. And that's the thing about Different Seasons, is because of the fact that he worked on those 4 novellas, and now granted, The Breathing Method, in my opinion, is pretty much a horror story. And Apt Pupil, Apt Pupil more so feels like a Bachman book to me in a lot of ways, and it could have dwelt within that realm. But there's really, aside from The Breathing Method, nothing supernatural in these stories. And, you know, really, I mean, Shawshank and The Body especially are the 2 that in King's afterword in Different Seasons, where he's talking about just the frustration and trepidation that he encountered because of the fact that his publishers were like, no, you're a horror writer, and if you try to put out stuff that is not in that ilk, audiences, you know, readers, you know, the reception, it's not gonna be receptive, you know. And by 1982, when Different Seasons came out, King had put out, I mean, the only thing that really wasn't super horror was The Dead Zone, which I just recently did a 40th anniversary review of, and that was where he was kind of segueing into, in my estimation, writing the great American novel, and really gave his damnedest attempt in that. And yet, besides that, even though there is horror elements in that, there's, you know, graphic, you know, murders that are mentioned in there and stuff, everything else was a lot on the supernatural, you know, just like outside the realm of reality things, you know. I mean, Carrie's powers of, you know, TK and all that stuff, and then obviously vampires in Salem's Lot, spiritual presence in The Shining, post-apocalyptic craziness and, you know, religious themes in The Stand, and then, you know, Night Shift and all of the crazy monsters and creatures and whatnot. That's all in that. And so, obviously Firestarter was out before this as well, and, you know, once again, very similar in vein to things that we got as far as a powerful girl in Carrie. So, you know, the book that has the inspiration for this, you know, the novella, Hope Springs Eternal, being the first story that we even encounter in there, it's another great thing about Different Seasons. And this is not a Different Seasons review. I am just giving some context. You know, it was really cool how King, you know, had all 4 of the seasons represented depending on the tale. You know, you had spring, you know, Hope Springs Eternal, which was this, and then, you know, summer, fall, and, you know, winter for The Breathing Method and everything. But yeah, it's one of the few instances, as we celebrate its 25th anniversary this past week. It was released on February, I'm just talking so many different dates. It was released on September 23rd, if I recall correctly, yep, in 1994. Very congested year for award-winning material, because Forrest Gump, and Pulp Fiction both came out that same year. And really, despite the 7 Academy Award nominations that this film received, including Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Cinematographer for Roger Deakins, Best Original Score, first nomination for, I want to say Thomas Newman, no, that's one of the few names I didn't write down, but also, you know, sound mixing, editing. I mean, it received a lot of love from critics, just not from audiences. It had a $25 million budget, which back in 1994, you know, we're not talking a Waterworld budget or anything, but I mean, 25 million was still fairly substantial, and that was because of the fact that the sheer scope of filming at this abandoned prison and everything, and just all of the extras and the extent of the shoot, which lasted months. I mean, yeah, that's a rather sizable undertaking, and yet, yeah, it only made around 16. So in its initial domestic release, okay, domestically here in North America, it didn't even make its budget back. It lost the studio money, and you have to really think that must have frustrated Castle Rock Entertainment and Rob Reiner and Liz a little bit, but the fact that it got so much love from, you know, critics and at the end of the year with all of those nominations and stuff like that, that's obviously what kind of evened things out. It found an audience over time on home release. It was one of the most rented films on VHS in 1995. And then TNT secures the rebroadcast rights for television and just has it in their loop of syndication and just re-airing. And so this movie, despite not having the audience that it had hoped for initially, yeah, it most definitely found it as time went on. And as time went on, you know, everybody else came around, not just domestically, but here internationally as well. It had a theatrical re-release in 95, I want to say, after the Oscars and all of the nominations, of which it won donuts, none, which is a travesty, but once again, competing with Forrest Gump, which was the feel-good, you know, I love Forrest Gump, love Robert Zemeckis. In some ways, I really love both that film and this film, so that's kind of tough for me, despite being a King lover, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And I also love Pulp Fiction. I struggle with what my favorite Tarantino movie is, you know, whether it's Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction or, you know, the first volume of Kill Bill. I guess Kill Bill is actually supposed to be one big film, so maybe it wouldn't be that, but... And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is right up there at this particular point. But yeah, so this being a prison film, no women in the film aside from the, you know, Tim Robbins, you know, Andy Dufresne's wife, who meets her demise, you know, at the hands of a murderer, and could it be Andy? That's what the crime he's accused of, obviously. So yeah, no women, and, you know, just the dirgy, depressing, just setting of a prison didn't find its audience. But obviously word of mouth and, you know, seeing all those nominations and stuff, maybe that is what helped to get people's attention, along with getting, you know, just the home video release and all of that other stuff. But what a film. And I rewatched it last night, you know, before the hail today, and this is a film that I did not properly appreciate when I saw it as a kid. I saw it as a very young kid, and I didn't know it was Stephen King at the time. You know, I was more concerned with, because it didn't really supremely bill the fact that it was based on a King story, and I think maybe that was a deliberate choice because of the fact that even in '94, King was still so closely associated with horror. And so for that reason, it's like, well, let's just market it as what it is, and maybe that would have actually gained some additional attention to it, but it would have been a double-edged sword. If they built it as a King thing, I think the die-hard King horror fans would have gone in and been let down, and then the people who actually would enjoy the hell out of this particular movie, who don't like scary stuff, they would have been turned off by the fact that King's name was attached and think it was something just much more on the scarific side than it actually is. But that's not to say that there aren't horrifying, sad, just really heartbreaking things that happen in this film. And upon a rewatch, you know, I hadn't watched it in a couple of years, and as I've watched it, as I've grown older, I appreciate it more and more. But this is my first time actually watching it since finishing reading every single thing that King has done, which was a journey that I started on about 8 years ago, and kind of went through the tail end of as I started Hail to Stephen King back in 2016 was the soft pilot. 2017 was when it began proper, the Return of the King year. That's what I classify it as. But This is probably the most I have ever loved this film, was in this viewing last night. And having reached my Midsommar and just, you know, a couple days ago, and realizing just how quickly time can pass, you know, without like a clear cognizance of it a lot of the time. You know, I mean, 19 years go by in Andy's life in this film, in Shawshank. And, you know, in the 2.5 hours, it kind of feels like a breeze. And that's really, as you get older, they say that when you're young, time goes by supremely slow. And as you reach your, like, you know, 20s and 30s and stuff like that, and you get more into a routine, more into a groove, the time goes by a lot faster. And that, in a lot of ways, is embodied in the time that passes in these 2 hours and 24 minutes, or 22 minutes, and whatever it is. And yeah, then, you know, once you like retire and you get back to older age, it slows back down. So yeah, these 19 years, 19, it just makes complete sense that that's how long Andy, played by Tim Robbins, so masterfully, a role that he apparently got based on the fact that, well, there were so many different things in play here. First of all, Frank Darabont being a first-time director, not a writer though. He had some Hollywood credits that I hold in the highest horrific regard. So he got acquainted with Cy King initially because he optioned The Woman in the Room, which was a short story that was published, or at least collected, I should say, in Night Shift. So he did a Dollar Baby short film of that, and that's where King, like, he first showed up on King's radar. He went on to secure the rights in 1987 for $5 grand for The Shawshank Redemption, and was just adamant that he wanted to adapt it. King was skeptical though. King was like, how is this adaptation gonna really pan out? Is it gonna, I mean, King kind of found it in some ways unfilmable, because it's really told from the older white Irishman Red. Yeah, we know the change that happened with Morgan Freeman there, and 100% for the better. You know, King just kind of saw the fact that it's a prison film, and that, you know, it's told all through like recollection and stuff, you know, with Red as the narrator. He was kind of curious about how it can actually turn into a, you know, especially larger budget film. But yeah, $5,000 is when, you know, Darabont secures the rights, and it still wasn't until 5 years later, because he needed to pay the bills, and so he scripted Dream Warriors, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, he co-scripted The Blob with Chuck Russell, who he also worked with on Nightmare 3, and then he worked on The Fly 2, the sequel to the Cronenberg remake. And so he had 3 terrific horror films under his belt, but he had the itch to direct still, obviously. So he did the 3 horror films, he cashed some checks and stuff like that, and then finally in '92 decided to write the script, which he did over an 8-week period, and then he submits it to Castle Rock Entertainment, which, yeah, Castle Rock, obviously. It was Rob Reiner's company, you know, the meathead on All in the Family. Rob Reiner also having directed Stand By Me. Castle Rock Entertainment had also done Misery, Dolores Claiborne. Like, they were basically, you know, your main spot for King adaptations in the late 80s, early 90s and stuff. And so they were the ones who were going to be producing it. They were really hot on the script. However, they tried to do Darabont dirty, at least to a degree. You know, there's conflicting reports about how this all went down, but basically they loved the script, but they wanted Rob Reiner to direct it. Rob Reiner had directed Stand By Me, and had, you know, through Castle Rock produced a bunch of other very successful, you know, adaptations, including Misery, and directed Misery too, if I recall. And so, yes, definitely did. What am I saying, Fuego? But yeah, since Reiner was the proven King adapter, you have a first-time writer-director with just some horror credits who's going to do this sweeping, dramatic film. And so there was skepticism, you know, perhaps even derision, you know, and lots of just, you know, can this guy handle it? Well, maybe if we're going to, you know, invest a bunch of money in this project with this sweeping script and everything, let's try to be safe and let's have Rob do it. And, you know, they basically told Darabont, we will finance any project you want to do. You know, let's just hand this over to the, you know, the proven commodity in Mr. Reiner. And now I'm suddenly thinking of the South Park where Rob Reiner and Cartman, and he's like, the assistant's like, would you like a cupcake? And anyway, I still love Reiner, even if he's got, you know, a little wacky at times over the years. But yeah, so they wanted to give the project to Reiner and just retain Darabont's script, maybe have some rewriters come in and stuff. And even though he grew up, he was originally born in France, he had tons of siblings. They escaped during the Hungarian Revolution in the 50s, originally relocated to Chicago. Then Darabont got out to LA. He was really tempted to take the paycheck, you know, to take the money and run, so to speak, you know, if we're going to quote the Eagles and everything. And I hate the fucking Eagles, man. But he stood firm, very similar to Sylvester Stallone, you know, with Rocky, where he wanted to be in the project as opposed to just hand it off and let somebody else run with it. He had that conviction that he needed to be as heavily involved as possible, essentially. And they ended up conceding. They allowed Darabont to direct it, and Rob Reiner stayed on as a cinematographer. And yeah, or excuse me, not as a cinematographer, because we're going to get to him in a second. He stayed on as just kind of like a mentor of sorts for Darabont, being a first-time director and everything. And yet, the casting was the big thing. And, you know, Darabont was like, well, you know, for Andy, I should go older. I'm going to, you know, cast one of my heroes like Robert Duvall or Gene Hackman. And that ended up segueing into, no, we need to go stars, because Reiner wanted stars when he was thinking about, you know, stepping in and taking over as the director. Apparently he wanted Harrison Ford as Red and Tom Cruise as Andy. That's what I have to say to that. That would have been, you know, as much as I love Harrison Ford, Morgan Freeman was the right choice. That change, it put the whole story, especially taking place in the late 40s, in a completely different perspective, with, you know, the two different, with like the racial harmony and the importance of that, you know, so very crucial. And yeah, Harrison Ford, I mean, hey, I love the hell out of the guy, but that would have been a bad choice. And I mean, Tom Cruise, I don't know, I guess they also looked at a bunch of other big time actors at the time, including Hanks, who was like, nah, I'm gonna go do Forrest Gump, including Kevin Costner, who was like, nah, I'm gonna go do Waterworld. And then there was like Johnny Depp and Charlie Sheen and a few other, you know, name actors at the time. But they decided on Tim Robbins because of the fact that he had done Jacob's Ladder, and that apparently impressed the hell out of Liz and Rob and Darabont. So he's cast. They want Morgan Freeman. He's coming off the Driving Miss Daisy, you know, Oscar and everything. So he's big time. He's cast. He's hot at the time, and rightfully so. Yeah, from there it was just all the different, you know, pieces coming together. One of the most important being hiring the cinematographer, hiring Roger Deakins. Man, why was I thinking Roger Daltrey, you know, the flippin' who. But yeah, Deakins, at this point in time, he is legitimately legendary. His work with Sam Mendes on, you know, stuff like, you know, Revolutionary Road and Skyfall and whatnot, but all of his work with the Coens, you know, I mean, we're talking Fargo, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, what else, No Country for Old Men. I mean, he's pretty much shot like all of their films for the longest time, and then most recently he got even more accolades with Denis Villeneuve and doing Prisoners and Sicario, and then finally, after so many nominations, winning for Blade Runner 2049, which is a just awe-inspiring film visually. It is so beautiful to look at. I love that film. I know it's a little long in the tooth. I know some people, it still is never going to hold a candle to the original Ridley Scott film, but I feel like it is in many ways a worthy successor, and if y'all haven't seen Blade Runner 2049, very important. But interesting thing though, Deakins was recommended by Tim Robbins because he had worked with Tim Robbins on the Hudsucker Proxy about a year or so before, and being a first-time writer-director, the studio definitely wanted a proven person to help him shoot the thing. And that's where some friction came about. Yeah, and Tim Robbins would actually go on to do his directorial film, Dead Man Walking, which had Robin Wright and Sean Penn, who would later go on to be married, and I think they're divorced at this particular point. But so yeah, Robbins was obviously a big fan of Deakins because he would go on to work with him again. But Deakins being the experienced guy and Darabont being the younger, you know, aspiring, you know, hotshot guy, I guess there was a lot of behind the scenes just kind of friction between them. Darabont and not just with Deakins and you know, Darabont, but with a lot of people. Darabont wanted tons and tons and tons and tons of takes, and a lot of the actors felt like he was overdoing it. Perhaps he was being overzealous, you know, as a first-time director. Also, Darabont wanted lots of big swooping shots, and you get some great aerial stuff of the prison early on, but really Deakins was the one who pushed Darabont significantly to do more stuff inside the prison, you know, less viewpoints, you know, on the outdoors, because he wanted to emphasize the claustrophobic aspect of being incarcerated and the importance of that, and just how it would really just pull the audience in and make them feel just constrained and just kind of, you know, like they are, you know, being held captive, just like these guys are, obviously, against their will, and they're being held captive in the theater. And I guess Darabont conceded to the experience, and in a lot of ways I would contend that that is most definitely with good reason, because it gives that vibe really more so than any, I mean, maybe One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to a degree. I mean, it's really tough to think of a film that is, I mean, I guess everybody loves the HBO show Oz. That one is definitely damn good as far as getting that vibe across, but Shawshank is probably, I would contend, the greatest just example of this. And ironically, despite being Maine, obviously, you know, the location, after scouting tons and tons of different places across the country, that they ended up deciding upon was a place in Mansfield, Ohio. It had been used since the turn of the century, but it had been closed 3 years before in 1990 due to inhumane conditions and the fact that it's still in operation. I mean, granted, they're criminals, they're felons, but we're having them live like this. There is a place where we need to draw the line, and so that they didn't have to deal with, you know, moving, you know, whatever living pieces over to one spot or whatever, aside from all of those actors and what they're all being put through, the extras and everything. So yeah, it was a completely abandoned place. The Ohio State Reformatory, as it was called. And it's interesting because it was supposed to be closed down after filming, but some people swooped in and purchased it, and over the years it has been maintained and turned into a tourist attraction, and they've got like Shawshank trails outside and around, and they've got tours of the facility, and I mean, all kinds of different stuff. So it just shows the lasting cultural impact of this film, that people will travel from all over just to see the site where it was filmed. And I mean, yeah, I mean, just the supporting cast is obviously big and important to mention. Clancy Brown as Captain Hadley. You know, I think the same year he was in Pet Sematary too. So that's a big boon, and he shows a little bit of just, I don't want to say vulnerability, but like even the villains in this, you know, the warden and Clancy's character, they're both shades of gray, because they show scenes of just compassion, and so, I don't even so much compassion, but just like when they find out that Andy can do stuff for them, they kind of take their foot off the gas pedal as far as the brutality and stuff. And so maybe that just makes them even worse people, the fact that they're not, but that does make them shades of gray. They're of a darker gray, you know, they're legitimate people, and they do stop harm in the film from happening to him. You know, when Drake from Aliens is like trying to rape him and everything, they end up pretty much putting that dog down, more or less, and I forget the name of that actor, but boy is he creepy in those scenes where, you know, especially the one where he's trying to get Andy to, you know, give him some, you know, like force him into fellatio, and he's like, I got this biting mechanism, you know, he's just like, I will bite all of your respective schlongs off, you sick bastards. And so yeah, that's a really terrific scene, and yet the only reason he's protected by the captain and the warden is because of the fact that they know what he can do for them, and so they protect him because he is a valuable commodity. It's not because they're really caring people, and it's later in the film, especially with some of the things that they do when they see the danger of losing him, that you really realize the extent of just how sinister these sick just Fergers are, man. And so, you know, Clancy is great, even though he's in definitely a supporting role. Definitely have to say James Whitmore as Brooks. He is so warm and loving, and the stuff with him, which was not in the book, because he was like, and he's in a very tiny bit, I want to say like, you know, maybe a couple pages or like a couple paragraphs or whatever the hell it is. I can't remember too well, because I purposefully did not reread this novella before this, because I felt like I would be doing too much of a direct comparison. It's why I didn't reread it, you know, right before seeing chapter 2. I just didn't think that, you know, just the basis of comparison. Yet I do distinctively remember, even if it's been a few years since I've read Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, that there's so much expanded upon with certain characters. There's also a couple character motivations and choices and differences that I do recall and that I will mention. But yeah, Brooks' character you know, I know he dies in the original, but I don't think he kills himself, if I remember correctly. I think it's like retirement home status and he just like passes away from sadness or whatever. But in the film, it's so tragic, and this is a theme that you get from both him and from Morgan Freeman's Red, in the difficulty of just somebody who is so just adjusted to life incarcerated. How do you reacclimate to being back out in society, especially if it's a society that you have been away from for decades and decades? And this was during like a major revolution of technology between phones and automobiles and all this different stuff. Like, this movie takes place in the late 40s, post-World War II, and just takes place over in about 20-year period. Can you imagine if you're like Brooks and you go in like, what, 1904, 1906, whatever the hell he said, and then he's getting released in like the 1950s, and cars are almost running him over, and he's, you know, he has a job, and yet, you know, he's slow on the uptake, and he liked where he was. He grew to just not even so much like, you know, he enjoyed where he was and he was satisfied with it, you know. But that's, you know, where you become creatures of habit once again, and where you are just a product of your environment after a period has gone by. And that's where the Brooks changes are so pivotal and just so soul-shatteringly sad, guys. I mean, guys and gals, it's just, I mean, James Whitmore, he is tremendous in this. William Sadler, you know, he'd done a lot of the Tales from the Crypt stuff, and I think Demon Knight came out this same year, maybe, if I'm not mistaken, and he's terrific in that. He'd also played Death in, you know, The Bogus Journey of Bill and Ted. Stoked for Bill and Ted Face the Music. Oh my god, he's returning for that too. But yeah, Sadler as a supporting player with a little bit more edge to him, where he's egging on, you know, the fish, you know, the heavier guy at the very beginning, and just what Clancy Brown's captain does, just beating that dude to death. It's just his first night there, and he's crying about I'm not supposed to be here. He sounds like Dante from Clerks, also released the same year. And yet, yeah, much worse. Well, actually, you know, in the original cut of Clerks, spoilers, Dante gets shot by a robber at the very end. It's not all happy-go-lucky with Randall coming back in and everything and, you know, saying you're closed. So, but it's a really tough scene, and that's where you see more of the, just, I guess, the shade of gray that his character is. Oh boy, Haywood, that's my name, I couldn't remember it. But yeah, Sadler is still good, and there is a warmth to his character, especially as the film goes on. And really, Robin's character, Andy, endearing himself, and like, you see a change in Sadler's character of Haywood when they're all working on the job up on the roof and they're pushing the tar and everything. And, you know, Andy, played by Tim Robbins, obviously, puts, you know, in a lot of ways, his life on the line, where, you know, Clancy is shaking him, like, right there on the top of the roof, and that's the spark that really turns into him being protected. And I do feel like he did that deliberately, not just to endear himself to his fellow inmates, but also to gain protection from the people in power. Shows the extent of his smarts in just trying to survive in this crazy place where, you know, there's danger and possible death at every turn. You know, very, very smart on Andy's part to forge those alliances on both sides. And so that's why that scene where he offers to help out with, you know, just this money that Clancy Brown's captain has access to, but yet he knows the government's going to tax the hell out of him for it. He's just like, I can help you, you can gift it to your wife, and so on and so forth, $35,000, all this other stuff. So he very wisely endears himself to the authorities, but also to all the grunts who he's in the thick of it with. So it's just, a dude was thinking, and he does just so many amazing things over the course of the story, from, you know, just expanding the book collection and building this impressive library, helping out with just, I mean, the intelligence and the learning of so many of these guys who, a lot of them can barely even read. There's, I mean, dumbass. It's just such a funny scene with William Sadler's character, and just all of the stuff that he endears himself to both sides, which is what's so crazy. And yes, he does allow the warden to just, I mean, he plays the game. And he plays the game because of the fact that he's trying to buy his time, plan his escape, and, you know, leave everybody without a lot of suspicion about him. He endears himself so much that he ends up without a cellmate, which is what allows him to actually orchestrate his escape. You know, because of the fact that he doesn't have another inmate who could go and, like snitch on him or whatever. And obviously, the arrival of the Rita Hayworth, that's right, Rita Hayworth's, her image, boy, she's striking in that Greta film that they watch at one particular point. And she was a supremely popular actress in the 40s and into the 50s and a little bit of the 60s. Breathtakingly beautiful. The scene where she flicks the hair and all the guys are ready for it. It's the funniest, man. I love it. I love it. It's so good. And boy, is she pretty. And you can see why, you know, they put the poster on there. And yet, Andy very wisely and very kind of connivingly, I must admit, you know, he gives the warden the impression that even though he has this beautiful woman on his wall, he's sitting there reading the Bible. He's saving face. He's keeping that impression. He's quoting scripture. Once again, this is a very smart guy who, having been accused of murdering his wife and her lover, this golf dude, you know, whatever, it's just, it shows that he was thinking so far ahead. It's like they show chessboards a few different times in this film. You know, he was thinking so many moves ahead, man. It's just incredibly impressive, and it shows so much merit to the great source material that King put down, obviously. But dare I say, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this review, I believe, is that one of the few times where the quality was expanded upon, and it's, I mean, I think that all three times Darabont, even though Darabont does condense aspects of the Green Mile in comparison, because, you know, this story is, if I remember, it's like 80 or 100 pages. It's pretty small, and this is almost a 2.5-hour movie. So it was a little bit different in the case of the Green Mile with having to actually trim as opposed to expand. The expansion of The Mist is fantastic. I mean, Frank can do no wrong with me as far as King adaptations go. He's pretty much in the league of Mike Flanagan at this particular point. So I will continue to contend that. But yeah, as I continue with the riffing process here, yes, we mentioned the fact that it lost money, and this is like, I've just been going. This is my first time even looking at notes in a while. I did mention, you know, Brooks' suicide. Obviously, the whole Brooks was here aspect, that was really, really cool. But yeah, the fact that he, you know, Andy becomes this librarian slash bookkeeper, helping the warden launder money, helping out with, you know, the taxes of all of these different, you know, officers and, you know, like, you know, guards and stuff like that. He just very wisely took all of the attention off of him in every possible way that he could. And, I mean, yeah, man, it's funny by the end of the film where, you know, they're approaching the discovery. He's, you know, almost 20 years have gone by, so, you know, his picture is switched from Rita Hayworth to Raquel Welch. I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, there's just it is the tale, not he who tells it. And that's a quote from the beginning, even before, if I'm not mistaken, we go into the 4 different novellas in different seasons. And that just gives such a perspective to me about not only King's humility, but the way that he is willing to have other people take his story, and in this case with Darabont, change things, you know? And just, I mean, changing, you know, Red to an African-American man, and he even makes the joke early on. They're like, why do you call you Red? And he's like, oh, probably because I'm Irish, and who knows if that's supposed to be a joke or whatever. But yeah, so there's that, and it's the story itself is so much more important than who tells it, and I do believe that that relates very much so to this masterful just expansion that Darabont did, and the fact that, yes, just the fact that, I mean, he's telling my story, you know, so just the importance of the story being told matters so much more than the fact that somebody else is presenting it to the world for just, you know, criticism and, you know, all those other things. A few other cast members I have to mention, you know, Bob Gunton as our Warden Norton is, you know, once again, similar to Clancy, he has a certain element of humanity and humility, which just makes those two characters, especially, you know, between him and Clancy, it gives their characters so much more just gravitas, and so they feel more like real people, because real people don't do evil 100% of the time. They just don't. It's a fact of life. That's why Shades of Grey, man, Shades of Grey. And there are certain moments that are mildly touching, at least, between the Warden and, our character of Andy. But it's those moments that when Clancy Brown's captain and, Bob's Warden do these horrible effed up things later in the film, that's what really, it makes them hit so much harder because of the fact that they were nice, even if it was, to their benefit and to their convenience and everything. They were nice to Andy, and they kind of protected Andy, and so it showed that they weren't just the scum of the earth, to quote Rob Zombie. But in the third act, you realize, yeah, I guess they kind of are. And it makes those moments, especially with, gotta give a shout out to Gil Bellows, who plays the Tommy Williams character, who shows up, near the, he's in the third act. A role that was originally going to be played by Brad Pitt. And then he got all popular with Thelma and Louise, and he's like, peace out, yo! He decided to leave the project, which was kind of funny. And, just the fate of the Tommy character, which is, I remember, different. The Tommy character is not, like, the same sort of sympathetic character like we get in this. He does have the information about whether or not, Andy is actually a murderer or not, despite claiming his innocence. Everybody in there claims their innocence, except for Red. Red is like, yeah, I was a stupid kid, and that leads to one of the best scenes in the entire movie, which is what I'm going to segue into here in just a little bit, is some of my favorite scenes in this film. But, yeah, the change with Tommy's character, it added so much more just sinister villainousness to the Warden character and Clancy's captain, obviously, and it added a tragic element to Tommy, and it really made his character a lot more interesting, and it served the story so much better, as opposed to him just selling out to get to a better prison or whatever it was, and since it's been a while since I read it. But he gets spoilers, and this is kind of a spoilers thing. He gets killed by, it's basically, once the Warden realizes, after talking with Andy, that, yeah, Andy is in fact probably innocent, and this kid Tommy could actually help get him, exonerated, so to speak. And he's like, well, we can't have that. This dude's too important to me. He's helping me launder money. He's helping, all these different things. He knows all my secrets. So, but yet I don't want to kill him because, he can do too much for me. And so Tommy gets shot by Clancy Brown's character. They make it look like he was trying to escape, which is why the Warden has him meet him outside near the fences, which Tommy thought was really weird when his presence is requested. And so it's that beat specifically that, after you've been given this false sense of, okay, maybe they're not that bad, these two, despite the horrible things that we've seen them do, most notably Clancy Brown beating the fat inmate to death on his first night of arrival. That's where they double down, and they're just like, these two need to get what they deserve. Damn right do they ever. This is legitimately one of the most satisfying endings, and I think that's why people love this story so much, because somebody who is, yes, they leave it vague for a decent chunk of the film, because it starts out with Andy sitting with a gun, drinking whiskey. He has been genuinely thinking about going to kill his estranged wife and her lover, and he decides not to. But you don't know that until later in the film, for sure. They keep it. They keep that tension and that uncertainty, which is really, really important as well. It's a very crucial theme here. And yet, yeah, once you find out for sure, that's where you're just like, okay, he is actually innocent. God damn, does he have to escape? There has to be a way. There has to be a way. And that's why when he finally crawls through 500 yards of shit, basically, and makes his escape, which actually, while he was crawling through sawdust and corn syrup and, different stuff through that scene after, he breaks through and crawls through the one tunnel that he's made with the little rock hammer, and he's like, oh no, I'm just fashioning rocks. After he gets out of that shit tunnel, basically the shit tube, he jumps into that mucky muck, high above the mucky muck, I fell into the mucky muck. That apparently was actually toxic, and, as Robin said in later interviews, he's like, yeah, you want to be a trooper on set, but boy, that stuff was horrible, and that in turn leads to one of the most iconic shots in all of cinema history, and that's where Andy is out in the rain and he's like stripping off, you know, the prison attire, and he's shirtless and he just collapses in the water and in the rain, and he's just looking up, just vindicated and just, you know, so triumphant. If there is not a scene that will enthrall you as much as that, I really contend in the comments below for you to mention what you think rivals that, because it is so up there in all of the greatest in all of cinema. I mean, it's just it just makes your heart grow 3 sizes like you're the goddamn Grinch or something. So I mean, impeccable, wonderfully done, and it's really the reunion stuff with Red, and it's a theme throughout where it's like, am I going to be like Brooks? Am I not going to be able to get out and function and be just a normal member of society? And Red, when he gets paroled after one of the best scenes in the entire film, 2 best scenes in the whole movie for my money, and they have some of the best lines as well, is where, you know, Andy confronts the warden about the fact that he is innocent, and there's this fellow inmate who can help get the gears turning for him to actually see a possible release and, you know, just, you know, clear his name and everything. Warden locks him up, you know, for 2 months in solitary, and when he gets out, you can tell he's changed, and he's just sitting there, you know, in the shadow of the penitentiary, and Red comes up, Morgan Freeman sits down, talks to him, and they're having this palaver, and he starts telling him about how he wants to go to Mexico because Mexico has no memory, and you know, all this different stuff. He wants to get to the Pacific. He wants to just get out of there and get over there, and Red is confiding in him, I don't think I can be on the outside. I don't think I could function out there. Like, I wouldn't even know the first thing about what to do. And yet Andy gives his battle cry, man, you know, where it's like, you got to get busy living or you get busy dying. And yet, even more so than that iconic line, there's him just relating to Red about the fact that he feels like he damned himself. He feels an essence of immense responsibility for all of these events being set into motion because of the fact that he's like, yes, I loved my wife, but I wasn't compassionate and caring with my wife. I wasn't abusive or anything like that, but I was just cold, and I was very much in my work, and I did not give her the attention that she deserved and that she needed, and that's why she ended up in the arms of another man, and that's why, being in the arms of another man, she ended up in a scenario to get herself killed. She ends up in that scenario because of, you know, just being neglected to get killed, and that in turn leads to the false accusation, which in turn leads to, you know, it's all a wheel, baby, it's all the wheel of Ka, everything being cyclical, and everything, it all comes back to Andy and all of this self-blame that he places upon himself for her death and for his own just terribly just demeaning and demoralizing situation that he's in the midst of. And that's the real spark where he finally decides, I've been working on this for so long, I've been, you know, slowly chinking away once I had no more you know, cellmate, and making this tunnel and hiding it behind this poster and everything. And so that scene, and then, you know, he makes his escape and everything, and then when Morgan Freeman is meeting with the parole board once again after Andy is gone, and everybody is just telling their stories and, you know, reminiscing, and, you know, it's just really sweet. And yet Red goes to meet with the parole again, and he was turned down at the very beginning of the film, and they ask him, you know, are you remorseful? And yeah, he's like, I am totally remorseful. I'm remorseful, you know, every single day, and yet, you know, I wish I could go back and talk to myself back then and talk some sense into him, but you know what? I can't do that. So you know what? You know, after all the years I've been in here, you know, I don't give a shit. And yeah, that's when he finally gets his you know, approval. It's crazy. So I mean, I could go on and on about the immense amazingness of this film, the fact that it finally just got its due as time went on. You know, in 2015, the U.S. Library of Congress decided it needed preservation in the National Film Registry for its relevance and its importance and everything. 72 out of the 100 films in 100 years by the American Film Institute. Number 1 on IMDb's user-generated top 250 since 2008. It's just crazy. This film needs to be seen. I saw it through. I appreciate it so much more now as an adult, and just the passage of time, the emotion behind it. And I'm not just a horror king fan like I was when I was younger, and I see just the immense importance as an aging adult of this film, and all of you need to watch it, celebrate it here on its 25th anniversary. So I have been Jaime Fuego. You can find moi on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and here on YouTube with my own personal YouTube channel besides the horror show. It's called Infuegotainment, and I've been doing Star Wars coverage, indie film coverage, some comedies like Good Boys, all kinds of good stuff. And yes, obviously you're here on the horror show. There's a few horrific things that happen in this film, which is why it is Parlay for the Process. And like, share, subscribe. Check out the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. There's so much amazing palaver, over 650 people on there. I have to give a big shout out to my boy Jacob Buddy Douse that had a birthday this past week, a fellow September. I was really busy with a super secret project we were filming with the horror show, and I did not wish him well, so I had to do it here on this particular episode with hopes that he sees it. And lastly, every Monday evening I do something called Show Business, 6 Pacific, 9 Eastern, on the Will Escridia YouTube channel, talking box office, both the previous week and looking ahead. So yes, that is the end of the proceedings. Please, 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 Shawshank Redemption, purchase this film, enjoy this film, savor the amazing creation that it is. And yes, until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, I shall say hasta luego, cinemigos, and constant readers and viewers alike, but I'm hopeful that we get to share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until that instance occurs, remember, stay scared and read Stephen King. Because yes, you still need to check out Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption in different seasons.